Hey, what is going on, everybody? Have you ever wondered which lens you should get? I mean, there's so many different options with so many different details. Which one should you get? I'm going to be covering that right now. Hey, what is going on, everybody? My name is Jesse Delgado with jessedelgado.com. I'm all about helping kingdom creatives create more, connect more, and cultivate the gifts God gave them. On my channel, you'll find filmmaking, content marketing, and really anything to help you build your personal brand. So if you like that stuff, please consider subscribing. All right, so let's get right into it, right? Lenses. There's so many different options. There's so many different choices. Which one to pick? Which one should you get? In some cases, the lens could actually be more expensive than your camera. And to be honest with you, it really matters more which lens you have than what camera you have. You know, a lot of times people will see a nice image and they'll say, oh man, what kind of camera do you got? All right, that's kind of the most instinctive question to ask. What camera do you got? But really, in many cases, it boils down more to the lens that they use and the focal length and the aperture and some of the other details on why that image is so pleasing. So let's get right into it. All right, so you got basically two different types of lenses. You got a zoom lens and you got a prime lens. And basically what that is the prime lens has one fixed focal length. Now each lens has its own mount. That's right here. It attaches to each different type of camera manufacturer, okay? And none of them are interchangeable unless you get an adapter. And that's something like this. I have an adapter right here that is for a micro four thirds mount, but connects to a Canon EF mount. So it goes into here, and now I can adapt this to a micro four thirds camera. Now, one of the things that you want to keep in mind with lenses is each lens is made for a different sensor size. So the three basic ones are full frame, APS-C, and micro four thirds. And that's in order from biggest to smallest. So if you're going to adapt a lens, you have to adapt a lens that is larger than the sensor size that you're trying to adapt it to. So you can't adapt a micro four thirds, which is the smallest one, to a full frame camera. It won't cover the sensor. It's too small. Okay, so what you need to understand about those different sensor sizes is each one adjusts in response to the focal length of the lens differently. So for example, I have a 50 millimeter right here that is a full frame lens. So on a full frame camera, this is a 50 millimeter. But if I put it on a micro four thirds, which has a 2 times crop because it's smaller, this actually turns into 100 millimeter. And if I adapt it to an APS-C, I'm not sure what the math would be, but it's times 1.6. And that's what this would be. So it's no longer a 50 millimeter. If it's a crop sensor, then you gotta do the math and figure out what the focal length is. So a lot of times for the micro four thirds cameras, which I have a few of them, I have to get the really, really low numbers, like the 7 millimeters and things like that, 8 millimeters, because it's times 2. So it's really a 16 or a 14. A 7 millimeter on a full frame lens would be just crazy wide. It'd be too wide. But on a 2 times crop, it actually comes out to be a fairly normal wide angle. So now that we're talking about the different millimeters and focal lengths, let's kind of break it down. You have the lower numbers, like the 7, the 8s, those are usually your fisheye type lenses. Those are your super wide. So the lower the number, the wider the lens. Usually you'll see that little fisheye thing. Now the higher ones are the ones that are more like telephotos or portrait lenses. And those ones are usually flat because it's more of a direct, longer zoomed in focal range. You don't need that wide lens. So that's basically what you need to understand about those different millimeter lengths. The lower the number, the wider it is. Then you got your walk around lenses, which could be anywhere from a 35 to a 55. That's your walk around lens. That's the lens you kind of just, it can be more versatile. You can use it for different things. You can get wide, you can get kind of close up. You can do a lot of different things with that walk around lens. And then you got something that's like a telephoto lens, which zooms in really, really far. That's just like your 100 millimeter, 200 millimeter, 300 in some cases. And those are usually used for like action sports or wildlife or somewhere that you just need to get really, really zoomed in on. So those are your basic kind of lenses. Now you also have macro lenses. This right here is a macro lens. Let's say macro on there. And so basically what a macro lens is if you want to get close to an object. The macro lenses are designed to be able to get close to a subject and still grab focus. If you tried to do that with a zoom lens, you can't get that close to it, and you can't take it, you gotta be further away. And there's a distance to each of them, and even the wide angle lenses, some of them you can't get that close to it and still get a picture that's in focus. So macro lenses, those are for your like food photography, insects, things like that. You can get some dope B-roll with them too. Now there's also what's called anamorphic lenses, and those are more in filming. Basically it's kind of a squeezed image, and they use that in like movies, and that's where you get those lens flares, and then you pull it into your editing software and de-squeeze it and all this kind of stuff. Also too, another type of lens is a portrait lens, and usually that's an 85 to 130, somewhere around that focal length, and that's what is really, really pleasing for shooting people. So if you shoot somebody on an 85, especially if it's a fast lens, you get all that bokeh, that blurry background, and it just looks really, really nice. People at that focal length usually look really, really pleasing. So that's what would be called a portraiture lens, and that's usually an 85 with a fast aperture. Okay, another aspect of lenses, something that makes a lens really, really expensive, but also really, really nice, and that's your f-stop, that's your aperture. So the lower the number, like a f1.4, is gonna let in a lot of light. And what happens is that it creates a lot of bokeh, which is that blurry background in the back. So you'll see a f1.4, in some cases f1.2, f4, f2.8. Those numbers indicate how fast that lens is. In other words, how much light that lens will let in. The lower the number, usually the more expensive the lens is gonna be, because it requires more elements to allow that lens to be able to function that way and let all that light in. So usually the prime lenses, the ones that are fixed focal lengths, usually have the lower f-stop numbers. They're the faster lenses, and that's why people usually use primes a lot, is because they're really, really sharp and they're really fast and they're good in low light. Right now, if you do get a zoom lens that has a low f-stop number, it's gonna be really big and really expensive, because it has to cover all those elements throughout that focal range, right? So there are some of them. This is a 1.8, 50 to 100, 1.8. Even that zoom range is really small. 50 to 100, it's basically 50 millimeters different. Like usually it's 70 to 200, or it's a longer range. But because the f-stop is so low, if you will, it can only cover in that big old lens 50 to 100 and still be 1.8. So that's something to know. If you do get a zoom that has a low f-stop number, usually it's going to be really big and really expensive. Okay, so speaking of f-stops, there's also something called t-stops. T-stops are used more in cinema glass. It's just a different way of measuring the light intake, but it's very similar. The numbers are very, very similar as well. So each lens has a coating on top of the lens, which causes flares to respond differently. And that's something that actually determines whether the glass is premium quality or not, is the way that it handles the flares. Not every lens is gonna handle flares the same way. Usually the lenses that are a little bit more pricey handle the flares really, really well. Now, in addition to that, there's also something called vignetting that happens, and usually that's on the wider lenses. In addition to that, something that happens on the wide angle lenses a lot too is distorting, and that's where the lines start getting all bent and things like that. And so once again, some lenses handle that better than others, but it's something to consider, especially if you're doing filmmaking. Like if you have a lens that has really, really bad distortion, it can be really difficult to watch that footage. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the pros and cons of everything that we discussed. Wide angle lenses are really, really good for walking around, for putting on gimbals, because the wider the view, the less shaky it's gonna be. That's why you see your GoPros and action cameras, they're usually fisheye lenses, because it absorbs the movement better. It doesn't move as much when it's wider versus when it's super zoomed in. Every little jitter, is really difficult and distracting. It's hard to watch. So some of the benefits are you can get some really great establishing shots. You can get a whole bunch of stuff in the frame, and it allows you to kind of just, set the expectation of where you're at. People can kind of see it, know where you're at when you start, doing some other shots. You can get some really cool wide angle portraitures, that's different, or landscapes. That's some of the stuff that's some of the pros. Some of the cons is You know, it doesn't really have that cinematic look. It's hard to get bokeh on wide angle lenses. It's hard to make it look, give it that quality that people are always going after, that blurry background. It's really difficult to get that on a wide angle lens. So those are some of the cons, I guess you could say. The walk around lens, obviously it's versatile. If you just had one lens and you needed to capture everything, a 50mm would be a really good lens to have. 50mm equivalent on whatever camera that you have, but that focal length is a really good focal length. A 35, that's a really good focal length to have to just walk around. You can kind of get some close up, you can get some, you can get all different kind of stuff with that focal range. So it's really versatile. A telephoto, those are the zoom ones, those 100s and things like that. Some of the benefits of those, you get that real cinematic quality. And something that happens with telephoto lenses is called compression. And basically that's where the subject and the background get compressed together. So it's this neat thing that kind of happens with these telephoto lenses where you can take a picture by, with somebody, maybe they got a monument in the background and they're clearly really far away from it. But because of that zoom, you can actually take a picture and make it look like they're standing right in front of it, because it compresses the background. So that's something that's really cool on the zoom lenses, creates kind of a bokeh as well. And so, but it's difficult to use. Usually you got to use it on a tripod. Usually, you got to be really, really stable, have some sort of image stabilization or something, because, any little jitter, it picks it up and it's really difficult. Me personally, my favorites are the prime lenses. I love the primes. I have this zoom right here, but it's really, really heavy, man. It's a burden to just carry around, and I have to use it on a tripod most of the times because it's just so heavy. And usually they'll have these little mounts on the bottom of them so that you can put the little quick release plate on there so that you actually mount this part to the tripod, because it's that heavy. You don't want your camera to be on there and it to mess up your camera. So I like the prime lenses that are really fast. The 1.4s, the 1.8s, they really get some really, really nice shots, create that bokeh, and create some really cool and pleasing images. So anyways, listen, I hope that helped you make a decision or give you some information on what lens to choose. There's so many different choices, I get it. There really, really is. But I wanted to give you as many of the factors as I possibly could to help you make a decision. Let me know what you think. What lens do you have, or what lens are you trying to get next? Till next time.